ag business at the Department of Agriculture. And I'm also the executive director of Missouri Ag and Small Business Development Authority, better known as MASBDA. And we're really glad to have all of you here with us today. We're excited about what we have going on. Missouri has had a long-term vision to grow agriculture, which is one of our state's top economic drivers, and make Missouri a bigger player in the food, fiber, and forestry markets. These new programs are a part of Missouri's long-term vision that can help farmers and agribusinesses take their ideas to the next level. The focus area for these new programs we're going to talk about today are technical assistance, workforce development concepts, fee offsets, and more. We have partnered here with MASBDA with Mallory Ray and her team, the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center, better known as MASIC. And we're here to provide assistance to you as you move forward through this. I want to thank Mallory for all of her help getting things going. We've also been working with some other individuals. The MASBDA board is primarily made up of producers and people who've worked in financial and economic development. And our board meets on a monthly basis, and we cover grant programs, loan programs, and other different financial options. The board explores grants on a regular basis, so this is an area in which they are very familiar, and they're excited to have a role in these new programs and helping producers get to the next level with their value-added agricultural concepts. So with that, today, I'm going to have Marla and Jacob going over some different programs. They're part of our MASBDA team and very important in that role. And then during the question and answer portion, Dan Cassidy is going to be with us as moderator. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers and follow up on some different specific areas later. So thank you all for being with us today. And this is being recorded so that you can go back and catch any details you missed later. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, Jill. Like you mentioned, my name is Jacob Stayer. I'm here with the Missouri Ag and Small Business Development Authority. As part of the Show-Me Entrepreneurial Grants for Agriculture, the SEGA program, as we'll refer to it kind of throughout, there's actually 5 different financial assistance programs associated with it. We're going to get into each one of these in more detail, but just kind of as a brief overview, we have a technical assistance grant program with a maximum of $7,500 and a 25% cash match. All of these programs will be scored by our board, like Jill mentioned, and then there are reporting requirements for all of these. We have a workforce development grant, which is a $5,000 grant with a 25% cash match, an innovation grant program, which is a larger $250,000 maximum grant with a 25% cash match. And then for colleges and universities here in the state, there's an institutional grant program with either a $100,000 maximum for a single institution or a $250,000 maximum if more than one institution partners together. And the match for the institutional grant specifically can be a combination of cash or in kind.
Good morning, everyone. This is Marla. I'm going to quickly go over the definitions that we're using for this for these programs. And before I get too distracted, you will see at the bottom of every slide today our deadline, our application deadline. These grant applications are due in our office April 28th before 5 o'clock, and that is one original, one hard copy, and one electronic copy. We expect these to be very competitive, all categories, and so we will hold to that. You may have to come by plane, train, or automobile, but we have to have them by 5 o'clock on April the 28th. So we've tried to be very more inclusive on the ag product definition. Agricultural, horticultural, viticulture, or vegetable product, growing of grapes that will be processed into wine, bees, honey, fish, other aquaculture, seed, livestock product, forestry. We have a lot of forestry in Missouri, or poultry or poultry product in its natural state. We've gotten a lot of questions on the definition of value added. Again, we've tried to be very open-minded. A change in the physical state or form of the product. I'm taking strawberries and making strawberry jam. The production of a product in a manner that enhances its value. How am I changing it that the consumer will pay more and be happy about it? The physical segregation of an ag commodity or a product in a manner that results in the enhancement of the value of that commodity or product. So we're looking at ways to add value, to put more money in the producer or the small business's pocket.
So now we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail on all of the different grant programs. And up first, we have that technical assistance grant. So this is kind of a planning grant, a consultation grant, where it's not designed to, add new equipment to a facility or upgrade any sort of facility. It's for marketing plans, slotting fees or distribution costs, e-commerce costs associated with website development. It can help fund a business to work with a grant writer to complete a federal grant application. It can be used for legal consultation. So either the cost of setting up a business, could be succession planning, could be tax planning, or food safety compliance costs, all focused on businesses that are increasing value-added agriculture here in the state. Like I mentioned earlier, grant funds can fund up to 75% of eligible product or project expenses up to $7,500. And there's a 25% cash match associated with this grant. A percentage of each grant will be withheld pending successful completion and final report that we receive on the project. This grant is for individuals, groups of individuals, businesses, nonprofits, cooperatives, or other organizations. Some of the keys that you'll see kind of throughout all of these grant programs is that they're really targeted towards businesses that are going to be expanding value-added agriculture in Missouri and that have a near-term impact. So quick results after the grant is awarded. And then economic development is another key consideration, focusing on measurable outcomes. So, increases in the number of jobs, increases in sales for that value-added business, potential capital investment that may result as the result of completing a business planning or a marketing plan. There are a few things that this grant can't fund. Like I mentioned, it's not actual for the startup of a business or an expansion. It can't be used to pay off any existing debt. It can't be used for any costs that are incurred prior to the date of grant award, which will be towards the end of June of this year. It's not designed for any production cost or operational cost. It's not for the actual implementation of any results that are found in a feasibility study or a marketing plan. It's not for salaries or fringe for the applicants involved. Can't be used to buy land, buildings, or equipment, or grant writing expenses. So if you're working with a grant writer for this specific program, it can't be used to cover those expenses. And then each applicant may only receive funding for a form of technical assistance one time. So if you're applying to work with legal counsel on a business succession plan, you can only request funding for that one time. All of these grants have scoring criteria that are laid out in the program guidelines. For this one, there's 45 points associated with the importance to the success of the value-added enterprise. There's 35 points for credibility and implementation, again, focusing on near-term results. And then there's 20 points of commissioner merit that can be awarded.
The Workforce Development Grant is targeted to small businesses that are adding value to agricultural products, that are looking somehow to provide training to their employees, eligible expenses, hiring, training, or certifying new or current employees that are related directly to the creation or expansion of this business. Again, it's a 75% grant requiring 25% cost share. Maximum award is $5,000, available as a reimbursement, meaning the small business will pay for that training up front, and then when that training or certification, whatever it is completed, that's when they turn in proof that the training or certification has been completed, along with the cost for reimbursement from MASBDA. A percentage of each grant will be withheld pending successful completion. For these smaller projects, I mean, basically, we're probably looking at a one-time reimbursement at the end of the project. Priority considerations, expansion, of an existing business, near-term impact. Do I have a piece of equipment that my employees need additional training on, and benefit local and the state economy? Can I add an employee? Can I pay these employees more? Can we process these 10 more hogs a week than we're currently doing with training on this new piece of equipment? Those types of things. Advertising for employees, recruitment expenses. Maybe you have an employee that you want to send to CDL training. That cost is much more than it used to be. Be thinking in your existing business, how can I help educate my workforce? Ineligible expenses, we cannot pay for production expenses, operational expenses, salary or benefits of current employees or managers, the actual equipment or supplies. On all of our categories, nothing can be reimbursed, no expenses that were incurred prior to the date of the grant award, which will be mid to late June. And cost of training provided by current employees, managers, or owners. There might be an internal cost to that, but that is not eligible for the grant. Very similar scoring criteria on all of our programs. Increase key employee measurements, number of new hires, average pay, increasing sales, credibility and implementation. How soon can this be done? And for technical assistance and the workforce categories, I think we're kind of looking at training or planning that can be completed by the end of 2023, give or take. Is there a class in Kansas City, that's in October? So that's kind of we're looking for some near-term impact on workforce and technical assistance. And then commissioner merit, 20 points. And I think I saw a question pop up in the chat. So all of our board members have 20 points for pure merit, gut feeling on these applications. Is it written in a way that it explains that the applicant knows what they're talking about? Is it credible? Do I have a good feeling about this? So just pure merit.
So now moving into a couple of our larger grant categories. So we have the Innovation Grant Program. So unlike the technical assistance and workforce, this can pay for facilities, equipment, upgrades to a value-added business could be used for cooperative marketing, production, or cooperative coordination efforts, all with that goal of increasing value-added agriculture in the near term. Marla mentioned for the smaller grants, we're kind of picturing those being complete by the end of 2023. That may not be the case with the innovation grant. On these larger projects, it may take a little bit longer, but one of the key metrics that will be evaluated is the near-term impact. Is the project kind of planned out? Is it going to be shovel ready once these are awarded in June? Just like the others, this is a 75% grant. So there's a 25% cash match associated with the project. The maximum grant award is $250,000. And then a percentage of each grant will be withheld pending successful completion and reporting of the project. We understand with these bigger projects and with these a little bit longer projects, folks might need reimbursed, before the final project is complete. We'll work with grant recipients on that reimbursement schedule, but we will be holding a little bit of it back until the project is done. The grant is targeted to individuals, groups of individuals, value-added businesses, nonprofits, cooperatives, or other organizations. Priority considerations, again, expansion of Missouri value-added business, expansion of value-added markets here in the state, near-term impacts, near-term, expanded markets, new jobs created, capital investment in the local economy. Some of the things that it can't pay for, so it can't be used to pay off any existing debt. It's not intended to be used for salary for owners of the business or current employees. It can't be used to reimburse anything purchased prior to the date of grant award in June. It's not designed to substitute existing efforts or research already underway. It can't be used for indirect expenses, operational overhead costs. It's not for the purchase of land itself, just facilities and equipment. And then can't be used for the payment of fines or penalties, bad debts, lobbying or entertainment expenses. Just like the other ones, there's 3 scoring categories. Economic development potential is going to be critical. So, that's new jobs, capital investment in your local economy, expanded markets for that value-added product, and impact to Missouri agricultural producers. That's going to be a key focus as well. 35 points for credibility and near-term impact. When are these new jobs going to be created? What's the impact of that? And then 20 points for commissioner merit.
Our institutional grant category is available to institutions of higher education in Missouri, and those are identified colleges, universities, vocational schools, tech schools, to develop new educational and outreach opportunities for value-added producers and businesses in Missouri. Speaker series, workshops, training courses, certification, train the trainer, foods, might be food safety, it might be value-added business planning, human resources, taxes, direct marketing. We know institutions out there, probably have some ideas that they've been sitting on. How can we grow value-added agriculture, in our region or statewide? The eligible expenses, training, supplies, salaries, subcontracting, facility rental, other educational expenses that will directly increase value-added agriculture. Again, 75% of the cost with a 25% cash or in-kind match. Maximum grant award. If it's a single institution applying by themselves, maximum grant of $100,000. We are really encouraging institutions to work together to strengthen their outreach. if two or more institutions work together, they are eligible for up to $250,000 in grant award. And I do want to add, institutions are also encouraged that they may be able to work with a commodity organization. There may be a commodity organization that, you know, that has some targeted outreach or education to their growers that they have in mind, but the education folks have the skills and the resources and the reach to carry that out. I mean, if an institution partners with a commodity organization, they don't qualify for the $250,000 unless there's more than one institution but participating. Let's see. Jacob, go ahead and move to the next slide. Again, ineligible expenses, indirect, substituting for existing efforts or programs that are already underway. We're looking for new outreach opportunities for value-added agriculture, equipment purchases, and again, payment of fines or penalties, bad debts, lobbying, entertainment. Scoring criteria very similar. Near-term impact of increased value-added agriculture, credibility. You know, does it seem very doable? You know, how valuable is the training proposed, and commissioner merit. So we've talked about match, and we wanted to hit cash match. So of the 4 category programs we've covered, 3 require cash match. The institutional category require, it can be cash or in kind. So what is cash match? So cash match is the equivalent of me providing $1 for every $3 that I request from in grant. So a couple of real simple math examples. If I want to purchase a $200,000 piece of equipment, I can request $150,000 under the innovation grant, and I will be liable for providing $50,000 of my own money towards the cost of that piece of equipment. Our board feels very strongly about skin in the game, and so keep that in mind as you're looking at your ideas, looking at your budget. Do I have the cash match? Another real simple example, if I'm going to be working with a legal firm on succession planning or expansion or new, I want to switch to an LLC, and the bill is $10,000, then you can request $7,500 from us, and then you will provide $2,500 towards that invoice, towards that cost. Basic eligibility, I mean, a Missouri resident, at least 18 years of age, you know, if it's an individual, or the project has to be located in Missouri. You know, maybe I live in an apartment in Kansas City, Kansas, but my family's meat processing plant is in Kearney, Missouri, Excelsior Springs, whatever. The project, the processing has to be located in Missouri. Normal U.S. citizens, enrollment in E-Verify if it's one of the larger projects. Timeline, we will announce grant awards no later than June 30th. And these grants are considered taxable income. So MASBDA will issue your business, if awarded, a 1099 next year for funds that have been expended. So keep that in mind. You know, talk that over with your tax advisor.
So the last program that we'll touch on briefly is the fee offset program. So unlike the previous 4, this is not going to be a grant directly with a producer. This is for value-added businesses that are working with a food processing authority, either the University of Missouri Food Processing and Safety Lab there in Columbia, or an outside food processing authority in another state. So this is an offset for fees associated with the services that they provide. So it could be food processing, food safety lab services, nutritional fact labeling, pH test, water activity test, and then process authority review. So for producers that are working with the University of Missouri Food Processing and Safety Lab, they don't have to do anything. That lab will bill MASBDA directly, and those costs will be offset. However, if a producer, in Kansas City is working with a processing authority in Kansas or Nebraska, they can still receive reimbursement for that. They will just need to send us directly a paid invoice, showing that they've worked with that processing authority and paid whatever cost. The maximum fee offset for any operation is $250. And then the rate for the services is going to be established by that processing authority. This can cover fees for services provided on or after March 1st of this year while the program remains open. The program status will be evaluated monthly according to remaining funds. Here's just a table of approved rates based off of the University of Missouri Food Processing Authority. It can range from pH and water activity tests for $10 or $20, all the way up to process authority review services, which is $200 per product. I believe somebody was going to drop in the chat the contact information for the food processing authority, so that would be a good resource to save as well for more information. So just a few kind of high-level reminders about all of these SEGA grant programs. We're looking for projects with higher potential of near-term impact. Another thing that we like to remind folks is to not let the lure of a grant drive your business. If there is a grant that requires sales to local schools or other institutions, and you've kind of created a niche for yourself of selling direct to consumer, don't necessarily reevaluate your entire business model just for the sake of getting a grant. Find a grant program that's going to fit with your needs. With these SEGA grants, there's a 2-month application window. Apply if you're already exploring an expansion idea. I've heard it described that projects that have momentum are going to be more likely to be funded. That's a good way to look at it. If you're not at the place where you're ready for the services that these grants provide, there may be other options that would be a better fit. We would recommend that anybody have somebody else review your application before you submit. So it could be a business partner, it could be your banker, or it could even just be your neighbor. Just look at the application and make sure that your needs are coming across well and you've communicated, and answer the questions clearly. And then speaking to the applications, we did design all these applications to be written by the producer. We've tried to provide prompts that ask very, very direct questions. Just focus on your idea for your business. How do you want your business to grow? And then how can you measure the results? So, if I purchase and install X piece of equipment, we'll be able to process, this much more food. Those measurable metrics are going to be key when we're looking at how these grants are evaluated. Now I think we'll turn it over to Mallory Ray.
Thank you, Jacob. So as mentioned in the beginning, we're very happy to announce that we're launching the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center, or what we like to call MAFIC. And this is work that started back in 2021 and is being funded by, that's when we submitted the grant application. And we just really started here in January, funded by the USDA Rural Development but our goal is to support the broader initiative within food and bev, and this is a fantastic grant program for value-added producers in Missouri. So we're a statewide network of partners, and we provide a range of technical assistance and resources, including business planning and startup assistance, product and process development. Kantha is part of our team, so he's on the webinar today. So is Joe Horner, Justin Kay, Debbie Kelly. They're all on this webinar listening in. Our goal is to help value-added producers take their business to the next step, whatever that means for that particular individual. And we're building a referral network so that when we can't be the right person to contact, we can send you on to who can. And we also provide some financial analysis work and marketing. So that's who we are. And Jacob, do you want to go to the next slide? In the context of MAFIC and MASBDA, I just wanted to reiterate that MASBDA is the best contact for grant-related questions. Marla and Jacob are fantastic to work with. Their contact information is there. I'm also going to put it here in the chat. And MAFIC is here as a resource as you build your business beyond the SEGA program as well. So while you're considering a SEGA, feel free to reach out. We may be able to help you think about your business expansion or analyze cost of production, look at the financial health of your business, help you understand your marketing strategies. And we are able to provide some assistance as you prepare for loan and grant applications, but it is very much on sort of a first come, first serve basis. And we don't write applications, we review and provide input into those. So that's how you can reach us. We have two other things that I wanted to just highlight. We have some upcoming webinars on grant applications. So the MASBDA team will be joining us again on March 23rd to put the SEGA program in the context of some additional grant programs at both the state and federal level that are designed to support agribusiness development. And then on April 6th, we're going to talk about best practices for writing grant proposals. These two webinars draw from a resource we recently created, and I put a link in the chat to that. Also in the chat, you'll find a link to register for those if you think that they might benefit your business. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory, and good afternoon, everyone. Just so you know, there's about 100 individuals on this call, and so we're thrilled with the participation today. We know you're very busy, and so we'll just jump right into questions. I do want to recognize, though, the work that Mallory and her team are doing at MAFIC, as well as the work that Jill and Marla and Jacob and Director Chin and the crew at the Department of Agriculture are doing. This has been a joint effort. There have been a lot of people involved in this, and so I want to thank all of them and recognize them for their time and efforts. We'll jump right into questions, and I'll say up front that for those of you that have written questions into the chat room, we're going to address as many of those as we can in the time that we have left. For those questions that are not responded to on this webinar, we will get together. We're going to put together a written answer to all of the questions that aren't covered here in this afternoon's webinar, and we'll either email those out to everyone that's on the call. In addition to that, we will put the answers to those questions that aren't addressed here on both the MAFIC website as well as the website at MASBDA. So you can find, again, any questions that aren't answered in the time that we have left this afternoon. You can find, we'll just give us a little bit of time and we'll get the responses to those questions posted at both the MAFIC and MASBDA websites. So with that, we'll jump right into questions. I've got one, and by the way, you all have done a great job with your questions. We didn't know what to expect, and once again, you've exceeded our expectations, and we have lots and lots of good questions. So I might just start with a question that came up about, can you apply for grants in more than one category? And answering our questions today are going to be our two resident experts, Marla and Jacob. So again, the question is, can you apply for grants in more than one category?
I can take that one, Dan. Yeah, you sure can. You know, I would turn this around and tell each potential applicant, each business to go back and evaluate their needs. If you find that maybe you have a value-added business that needs to expand, needs some new equipment to fill a request or an order that you've received, absolutely an innovation grant might be a good fit. But if you also need to train a couple new employees to run that piece of equipment, that might be a good fit for the workforce development grant. So yes, somebody can apply for more than one grant category as long as they have needs that are addressed by each specific grant.
Thank you, Jacob. And so maybe to take it one step further then, so given the example of a university that applies for an institutional grant, they could also apply for an innovation grant.
Yes, that's right. And we've talked about that here, and that's very appropriate.
Okay, thank you. All righty. So could you perhaps just take a little bit more time to describe when this would be specific to the institutional grants, what constitutes an in-kind match?
So an in-kind match for institutions would be the time. It could be the time of people working on the project that we're not reimbursing. The university is already paying for that time. It could be facilities. Maybe there's a workshop or a training at Cantha's shop, at the Food Processing Authority, and he donates that time, or use of equipment. It's something that the university or the college or the tech school provides that costs them something that we're not paying for, that's not included in the grant request.
Okay, thank you, Marla. Here's another one. Under the innovation grant, our new employees, the cost of adding a new employee, could that be included?
Good question, Dan. I think when we are looking at that, when that question has come up, that new employee would maybe we've talked about it in the context of maybe a group of producers or a group of businesses hiring somebody to help them with a cooperative marketing strategy. I think in that case that cost could be applied for.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Again, back on the innovation grant, a question about substitution effects. And so if there's already a research or an educational program underway with regard to one of the topics that's eligible, and I think as we go back to the eligibility criteria here, if there's something already that's already underway, would it be eligible for funding under this program?
The way we've got it in the program guidelines, no. I mean, we are happy to, to visit about that, to take questions, but what we're looking for here is something new or expanded. Maybe like you said, there is an existing program out there, but maybe it's been restricted to one county or something like that, and the proposal wants to take it across 12 counties, something like that. I think something like that could qualify, but if it's simply to support an existing training, no.
Okay, thank you. And so there was a follow-up to that earlier question about, so I'll read this: to clarify, unrecovered indirect costs for organizations can be used to meet the required match. So again, unrecovered indirect costs. And again, this would be for the institutional grants. Could that be counted towards the match requirement?
I guess I'm going to have to say, I don't know what unrecovered indirect cost are.
All right, so what we might do on that one is just if there could be some clarification in terms of what you're thinking about when an unrecovered indirect cost, and we can follow up on that one further.
yeah, let us know. Give us a little more detail.
In Marla, for Marla and Jacob, if a question comes up today that perhaps is new to everyone that kind of hadn't been anticipated, I think for purposes of today's webinar, the thought would be, kick it around and then we'll put an answer out in writing. Does that make sense? If it's not something that had been anticipated and somebody provides an example, something that perhaps needs further consideration, then we'd respond to that in writing to all the participants.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been very honest. These are brand new programs. A lot of thought and time and went into these, but we welcome questions, because it's like any question, you're probably not the only one that's thinking about it, and we will talk about it and get back to you.
Thank you. All right, here's one that I imagine some people are thinking about. If new equipment lead time is 24 months, will this hurt the chances of approval since it is not near term? And so again, this would be an equipment purchase, most likely under the innovation grant. If it's, and we know there's supply chain issues out there now, so if it's a longer term receipt of that piece of equipment, how will that be accounted for?
Good question, Dan. And we would encourage folks to be upfront about it in their application. Don't feel the need to say there's a shorter lead time than there is. There's a possibility that a project that is buying equipment that has a shorter lead time, that might constitute a near-term impact, but maybe if something has a long lead time, it's going to have a very large impact on the business. So that's something that our board is going to have to evaluate as well. So I guess the answer to that is it depends.
Okay, understand, Jacob, for sure. Question about a commercial kitchen. And this would be a space for others to come in and use for preparation, certification, packaging, that kind of thing. Would that be eligible for under the guidelines of the innovation grant?
I think that it would, yes.
Okay. So if someone's awarded a grant, and again, as you said earlier, the grants will be awarded sometime before the end of June. If someone is awarded a grant, how will they receive that notification?
So I think we anticipate Jacob and I will make phone calls to tell to tell the folks the good news, followed up by written confirmation. I guess there is the possibility, if a grant application is not funded at their full requested amount, I don't know that will happen, but as we do expect these to be very competitive. There could be the possibility that an application request, for the larger ones, let's say $250,000, and our board strikes one piece of equipment and they're awarded at $200,000. That could be a very real possibility. When Jacob or I call, we would ask the applicant, can you still go forward? Can you still make this work? Will this still work for you? So I think we'll make phone calls followed up by a letter for your files, and then we will prepare grant contracts between MASBDA and the recipient. For the larger grants, we'll talk about reporting and timelines, things like that.
All right, thank you. Is there a specific timeline for completion of an innovation grant once it has been awarded?
There's not, like I mentioned on the smaller grants, workforce and technical assistance, we would like those done ideally by the end of the year. Innovation and institutional, there's not a specific timeline. But again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but one of the things our board is going to be evaluating is the timeline involved the grant application is going to ask for, when is the construction, on a facility, expansion of a facility supposed to be complete? When is the equipment going to be ordered and installed? So there's no set timeline for those. And if the grant is awarded, like Marla mentioned, we'll work with each individual recipient to establish a timeline for the grant and a reporting timeline.
That sounds great. If you could you explain once again, we talk about grant programs here. Really, in essence, these are reimbursable grants. And so could you explain that perhaps a little bit further on what we mean by a reimbursable grant?
Absolutely. That's a good clarification. So, so all of these grants, you will get a grant award letter, but we will reimburse costs that you incur. If we approve you for a piece of equipment, we expect you to order that equipment, pay, make a down payment for that equipment, and we will reimburse you for that expense. For the larger grants, we can work with you on some direct payments to a vendor, if that will help you out. For the smaller grants, for the workforce and technical assistance, $5,000 and $7,500 max. We will expect you, to pay for that technical assistance, enroll in that certification or training for your employees, pay that, and then when that training is complete, when that business plan is complete, you provide us with proof that it's been completed, and you send us proof of payment that you've already paid for it, and we will reimburse you.
So the intent here, Marla, is not for people to have to go out and get loans up front on this. It's to reimburse, perhaps look, if it's paying a supplier of services directly, that can be done as well.
It can be done on an approved invoice for the larger grants. If you're ordering a $150,000 pasteurizer, and you provide us with that invoice, that you have approved.
Okay, we have some clarification.
I think we're having a little technical difficulties with Dan's connection, but Marla, go ahead and finish that thought.
So we can pay a vendor directly if it's for a cost that we have already approved. Say you've ordered a $150,000 pasteurizer, and it's being delivered, or it's been delivered, and you send us an approved invoice. We can pay that vendor directly on your behalf. It's still considered income for you. It is still income for your business, but we can take care of paying that directly.
Dan, are you back online with us? Do you want to pick up the Q&A now?
Sure, Mallory, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So could you go over one more time, and we've had a couple questions regarding the scoring criteria for the innovation grant. If you could just perhaps give another review of what that scoring criteria will be, including the role of the board of directors.
So scoring for innovation grant, I'm going to pick up. So all of our grants are scored on the 100-point scoring criteria, all very similar. 45 points for ag economic development potential. In your application, be very clear on if you're awarded, you know, how many more pounds of product can you process? What's the demand? You know, is there an unmet demand out there? Do you have orders waiting that you cannot fill unless you get this new piece of equipment, or you add more cooler or freezer space, whatever that might be? You know, quantify it: dollars, pounds, new employees, numbers that you probably already have, you know, on your desk or in the back of your mind. We want to see credible and near-term impact, not wishful thinking. You know, if I'm awarded, if I can put in this additional cooler space, if I can buy these 2 more additional pieces of equipment, I can produce this much more value-added product. I can do a new product line. I can serve a new client. That type of thing. And then we've covered commissioner merit. You know, just how well is it written? How credible? Do they know what they're talking about? How long have they been in business? Are their numbers? Do they make sense? Do I know? You know, have we seen projects like this before? How is it pie in the sky? Is it wishful thinking? Or these people have a need that needs to be met?
And one thing I might add, Marla, on any of these programs, not just innovation, we have program guidelines posted that are available at the MASBDA website. And, you know, for the presentation here, we just kind of put the headers on these scoring criteria, but we go into each one in much more in greater detail, you know, and kind of line out what sort of things we're looking at. So I would encourage folks to go ahead and review those as well as they're working on their application.
Great, thank you, guys. Here's another one. Are nonprofits or cooperatives eligible for the workforce development grant? If so, can funds be used for volunteers, members, board members, or is it employees only?
I mean, the scoring criteria is pretty specific as far as economic development potential. How much more product, you know, can the business produce? What can it be sold for? How many more producers can you bring in? As far as salaries for, you know, for employees or covering the cost of volunteers, I don't think that would qualify. I mean, that would be considered operational expenses.
Marla, would it make sense in that situation if a nonprofit or a cooperative had an idea for an educational program that perhaps they work with a college or university to come up with an educational program that their members, not necessarily employees, but their members could benefit from? And so again, it may not be the workforce development piece, but it could be fit. I guess the question is, could it be fit into an educational program under the application of a college or university?
Absolutely. Good point.
Okay. Okay. That's great. So with regard to submission, if you look at the guidelines in the application, it talks about an original, a hard copy, and then an electronic version to be submitted by 5 o'clock on the 28th. So the question was, if the original submitted, does that take care of the hard copy as well? Or is it intentional that it's a hard copy, the original, and one electronic copy to be submitted to MASBDA?
We'd like all three, an original,
Yeah.
an extra hard copy, and then the electronic copy submitted to MASBDA mda.mo.gov that you see on the slide. Having all three helps us out on our process when we're getting them out to our board for review. So yes, please, all three.
Okay, makes perfect sense. There was a question at the beginning of the webinar about urban agriculture. So was that discussed in the development of the programs? And if so, would urban agriculture be considered eligible? Projects that are related to urban agriculture be eligible for any of the buckets that we're talking about here today?
I think urban agriculture would certainly be eligible. We really didn't talk about it, but everything we talked about, the focus is to be more inclusive than exclusive. I mean, I would just refer everyone back to the scoring criteria: economic development potential, near term, dollars, pounds, salaries, employees. What is the impact? And we realize it might be difficult for our board to to score these side by side, and that's why we urge everyone for all of these categories to be as specific, to use good numbers, not wishful thinking. Tell us why we should invest in your project. These programs are meant to be economic development. How will those dollars be returned to the economy of Missouri and to agricultural producers? What are we investing in? What's going to be our return on investment?
Great. And Marla and Jacob, I apologize, but it looks like my internet is somewhat unstable. So if you don't hear me for a minute or two, you might jump in. I apologize. Here's another question. We have a participant who's preparing to build a butchering facility, and they secured a loan. Will the innovation grant still apply if the project's already been started?
Good question, Dan. I think I see where you're getting at here. So yes, the project could still be eligible, as long as those costs have not been incurred prior to the date of grant award. It can't reimburse for anything done up until June 30th when these grants are awarded. But for that butcher shop that's received a loan, that loan can be used to pay for some equipment and use that as the cash match. So yes, that project would still be eligible.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that answers questions that several people had with regard to potential projects. So here's another one: reimbursement for materials that have been purchased for things that have been built. For example, materials to build a kitchen. Once the build is complete, could recipients invoice MASBDA for labor they have contributed for a self-built project? So really, there's two questions here: reimbursement for materials, and then the second question would be, if in fact it was the applicant's own labor that was put forth to build the project, would that be eligible as well?
So reimbursement for materials, no expenses incurred before the date of the grant award are eligible. So let's just say you are awarded a grant, the board voted to award those grants on, I'm not sure what day we're meeting, June the 20th, whatever. I mean, that would be the official date of grant award, and we would be very specific about that. No expenses incurred before that date are eligible. As far as self-labor, I think we talked about that. I think we probably veered away from that being eligible. Thank you for nodding your head, Jacob. Because that's really hard to document and justify. So that would not be an eligible expense.
Okay, Marla, thank you. And We have come to 1 o'clock. We have one additional question that we'll ask you to respond to, and then we'll wrap up. Do you think this grant will be repeated in the future?
Could even jump in here. This is Jill. And so I think there's potential that this could be repeated in the future. This money is coming through legislature. And I think that, you know, that also goes to the responsibility of providing us with the best applications possible in order to score. The one thing legislature asks always is, what's the return on investment? So that's the thinking of everyone involved as to whether we get more money and who we choose, who the board chooses to get the grant award. There's a lot of responsibility with that. We've got to be able to go back to legislature and say, this was worthwhile. Can we have additional funds? So if you think that, you know, we're pretty specific on all of these things because of the specific nature of the reports we provide back to the legislature. So we are hoping that we will have more of these in the future, but it's yet to be determined.
Thank you. And for those that joined the call after it started, that was Jill Wood, who is the Division Director for the Agriculture Business Development section at the Missouri Department of Agriculture. So Jill, thank you for that answer. We'll wrap up by saying, Jacob, Marla, thank you for answering the questions, the presentation. Mallory, the same to you and your team and the good work that you all are doing, that network that's been formed throughout the state. I think that we were able to respond to the questions that were presented today. I don't think we left any out there hanging by my count. If there was something that didn't get answered, feel free to send an email or reach out to Marla or Jacob. Their contact information has been provided. We wish you all well. As was mentioned earlier, the applications themselves were developed. There was really an effort to make them concise and something that you would not have to go out and find a grant writer to respond or to respond with the application. So that was the intent, to make these as simple as possible. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to Jacob or Marla. Technical assistance type questions, MAFIC is going to be a tremendous resource for the state of Missouri. We're excited that they've come together. Mallory, again, we thank you and your team for all that you're doing. And for those that joined us today, thank you for your time. And I might just mention that, and if you could, Jacob, put the slide back up on the 2 upcoming webinars. And we'll just leave you with the reminder that there's a couple of more opportunities or additional opportunities to learn about grant writing and potential opportunities out there for funding. So please take note of that. And again, thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.